The plane was a heartbeat away from disaster. At 30,000 feet, a piercing scream shattered the hum of the cabin, and Elias Navarro's life tilted on its axis. He was nestled in the plush cocoon of first class, champagne flute in hand, when chaos erupted in economy. A woman in labor, a flight attendant scrambling, and no doctor on board. Elias, a 32-year-old architect from San Francisco, wasn't supposed to be here. He'd booked this red-eye to New York for a career-defining pitch, a chance to design a community center for queer youth. His life was a mosaic of ambition and quiet longing, single, gay, and perpetually dodging his mother's calls about settling down. The first-class seat was a rare indulgence, a reward for years of grinding in a city that both celebrated and exhausted him. But now, as the flight attendant's voice crackled over the intercom, pleading for medical help, Elias felt a pull he couldn't ignore. He stood, his 6-foot frame unfolding from the leather seat, and caught the eye of a man across the aisle. This stranger, maybe 29, with sharp cheekbones and a faded denim jacket, looked up from his sketchbook, his pencil pausing mid-stroke. His name, Elias would later learn, was Julian Reese, a freelance illustrator from Brooklyn, whose warm brown eyes held a flicker of curiosity and defiance. Julian had been sketching the curve of the plane's window, capturing the fleeting glow of the clouds. Their gazes locked for a split second, electric, before the flight attendant's urgent call snapped them back. "Sir, please, we need help." The attendant, a young woman named Carla, was breathless, her hands trembling as she gestured toward economy. Elias hesitated, his mind racing. He wasn't a doctor, just a guy who'd taken a first aid course in college. But something, maybe the scream, maybe the weight of Julian's gaze, propelled him forward. He handed his champagne to Carla and said, "I'll help." The woman in labor was Marissa Delgado, 35, a single mother from Oakland, her face slick with sweat and terror. She clutched the armrests, her breath shallow, as her contractions came faster than the plane could fly. Her water had broken mid-flight, and the nearest hospital was hours away. Elias knelt beside her, his voice steady despite the panic clawing at his chest. "Marissa, I'm Elias. I'm not a doctor, but I'm here. You're not alone." Julian appeared beside him, unasked, his sketchbook abandoned. "I'm Julian," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I've got some EMT training from a summer job. Let's do this together." His hands were steady as he checked Marissa's pulse, his presence grounding Elias in the chaos. The cabin felt like a pressure cooker, passengers craning their necks, a baby crying somewhere, the hum of the engines a relentless reminder of their isolation in the sky. Marissa's eyes darted between them, wide with fear. "I can't do this here," she gasped. "It's too early. I'm only 34 weeks. Elias squeezed her hand, his architect's precision giving way to raw empathy. "You can do this," he said. "We'll get through it together." Julian nodded, his fingers brushing Elias's as they worked to make Marissa comfortable, rearranging blankets and pillows in the cramped space. The next hour was a blur of instinct and adrenaline. Elias coached Marissa through her breathing, his voice a lifeline as her contractions intensified. Julian relayed instructions to Carla, who fetched towels and a first aid kit from the galley. The other passengers, initially frozen, began to rally, offering water, a jacket, even a whispered prayer. But it was Elias and Julian, strangers an hour ago, who became Marissa's anchors. Their hands moved in sync, their eyes meeting in fleeting moments of reassurance, a silent pact forming in the chaos. As Marissa's screams grew sharper, Elias felt his own heart pounding. He wasn't just helping a stranger. He was tethering himself to this moment, to Julian, to the fragile miracle unfolding at 30,000 feet. Julian's calm was infectious, His quick glances at Elias laced with something unspoken, admiration, maybe, or the spark of something deeper. They were two men, strangers bound by crisis, their differences in background and burrows fading against the urgency of life. When the baby's head crowned, time seemed to stop. Marissa's strength was waning, her face pale, but Elias and Julian didn't falter. "You're almost there," Julian murmured, his voice soft but commanding. Elias held Marissa's hand, his own trembling now, as she pushed with everything she had. And then, with a cry that pierced the cabin, a tiny, slippery life emerged into Julian's hands. A girl, small but fierce, her wail a defiant anthem against the odds. The cabin erupted in cheers, a wave of relief washing over the passengers. Elias felt tears sting his eyes as he wrapped the baby in a clean towel, handing her to Marissa, who sobbed with joy. Julian's hand lingered on Elias's shoulder, a quiet acknowledgement of what they'd just done. In that moment, with the plane still soaring through the night, Elias felt something shift inside him. A crack in the walls he'd built around his heart, a glimpse of a life less solitary. As the plane began its descent into JFK, Marissa named the baby Hope, a tribute to the strangers who'd become her heroes. Elias and Julian exchanged numbers, their conversation stilted but charged, the weight of the night still hanging between them. Elias returned to his first-class seat, but it felt different now. Less like a luxury, more like a reminder of what he'd left behind to help. Julian, back in economy, sketched Hope's tiny face, his pencil tracing the curve of a miracle. The story of Flight 214 spread like wildfire on social media, passengers posting blurry photos of Elias and Julian kneeling by Marissa, their faces lit with purpose. But for Elias, the real story wasn't the headlines. It was the way Julian's smile lingered in his mind, the way Hope's cry had rewritten something fundamental in his soul. As he stepped off the plane into the chaos of JFK, Elias knew one thing for certain. Giving up that seat had changed everything. Elias stepped into the fluorescent glare of JFK's terminal, his legs unsteady from the adrenaline crash. The air buzzed with the chaos of travelers, but all he could hear was the echo of Hope's cry, the weight of Julian's hand on his shoulder. He glanced back, searching for Julian in the crowd, but the illustrator had vanished into the sea of faces, leaving only a phone number burning a hole in Elias's pocket. New York was a whirlwind. Elias's pitch for the Queer Youth Center went better than he dared hope, the board captivated by his designs and his passion. But as he spoke about safe spaces and community, his mind kept drifting to Marissa, to Hope, to Julian's steady hands in the chaos. He texted Julian that night, a simple, "Hope you got home safe. Thanks for everything." No reply came, and Elias told himself it was fine. Julian was probably busy, probably straight, probably not interested in a fleeting connection born of crisis. Days turned into weeks. Elias threw himself into work, sketching plans for the center in his San Francisco studio, a sunlit loft overlooking the bay. But the city felt different now, its vibrancy tinged with a restlessness he couldn't shake. He kept replaying that night on the plane, the way Julian's eyes had softened when he handed Hope to Marissa, the way their fingers had brushed in the dim cabin light. It wasn't just attraction. It was something deeper, a shared moment of purpose that had cracked open a part of Elias he'd long ignored. One rainy afternoon, Elias got a call from Marissa. She'd tracked him down through the airline, her voice bright with gratitude. "Hope's doing great," she said, her Oakland accent warm. "I want you and Julian to meet her properly. I'm throwing a little thank you party next month. You in?" Elias's heart leapt at the mention of Julian. "Yeah," he said too quickly. "I'm in." The party was at Marissa's small bungalow in Oakland, a cozy space filled with mismatched furniture and the scent of homemade tamales. Elias arrived early, his pulse racing as he scanned the room for Julian. Marissa greeted him with a hug, hope cradled in her arms. Now 6 weeks old and impossibly small. "You saved us," Marissa said, her eyes shining. Elias shook his head, embarrassed. "I just followed Julian's lead." Julian arrived late, his denim jacket speckled with rain, his sketchbook tucked under his arm. He looked different in daylight, less guarded, his smile wide and unguarded as he spotted Elias. "Didn't think you'd show," Julian said, his voice teasing but warm. Elias felt his cheeks flush. Couldn't miss meeting Hope again. The party was small but lively, a mix of Marissa's friends and family, all buzzing about the heroes of Flight 214. Elias and Julian gravitated toward each other, their conversation easy but charged, like a current running beneath their words. Julian talked about his art, how he'd been sketching scenes from the flight, trying to capture the raw emotion of that night. Elias confessed his dream of building spaces where people like them, queer, searching, human, could feel safe. As the night wore on, they slipped outside to the porch, the rain a soft curtain around them. Julian lit a cigarette, the glow illuminating his sharp features. "You ever think about fate?" he asked, exhaling a plume of smoke. Elias laughed, nervous. "Not really. You?" Julian's eyes met his, steady and searching. "I didn't, until that flight." The air between them crackled, heavy with possibility. Elias wanted to close the gap, to ask what Julian meant, but fear held him back. He'd spent years guarding his heart, burned by fleeting hookups and unrequited crushes. Julian, with his easy confidence and quiet intensity, felt like a risk Elias wasn't sure he could take. But then Julian reached out, his fingers grazing Elias's wrist. "I kept your text," he said softly. "Didn't know how to reply. I'm not great at this." Elias's breath caught. "At what?" Julian's smile was shy, almost boyish. "At saying I felt something up there. With you." Before Elias could respond, Marissa called them back inside. Hope was awake, and she wanted her guardian angels to hold her. The moment broke, but the spark lingered. As Elias cradled Hope, her tiny hand curling around his finger, he stole a glance at Julian, who was watching him with an expression that made his chest ache. For the first time in years, Elias felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The weeks after the party were a slow burn. Elias and Julian texted daily now, their messages a mix of banter and vulnerability. Julian sent sketches, quick studies of Hope's tiny hands, the curve of Marissa's smile, even a portrait of Elias, his face lit with quiet determination. Elias, in turn, shared photos of his architectural models, confessing how Hope's birth had inspired a new design for the youth center, one with a nursery for young parents. They met up when Julian visited San Francisco for an art show, wandering the Mission District's vibrant streets, murals bursting with color around them. Elias, usually reserved, found himself opening up about his Mexican-American roots, his fear of failing the kids who'd rely on his center, his struggle to find love in a city that felt both boundless and lonely. Julian listened, his eyes sharp and attentive, sharing his own story, a childhood in foster care, a coming out that left him estranged from his family, a life built on art and resilience. One night, over tacos at a food truck, Julian admitted he'd never been in a real relationship. "Too much moving around," he said, his voice low. "Too much running from myself." Elias felt a pang of recognition. "I get it," he said. "I've been running too, from anything that feels too big." Their hands brushed on the table, and this time, neither pulled away. Their first kiss happened a week later, under the Golden Gate Bridge at dusk. The fog was rolling in, the air sharp with salt, and Julian's lips were warm and certain against Elias's. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a confession, a promise, a collision of two lives that had been orbiting each other since that night in the sky. Elias felt like he was falling, but for once he wasn't afraid. But life wasn't a fairy tale. Elias's project hit a snag when the city council delayed funding, threatening to derail the youth center. He poured himself into revisions, working late nights, his stress mounting. Julian, meanwhile, was grappling with his own demons. An art commission fell through, and old insecurities from his foster care days resurfaced, making him withdraw. Their texts grew sporadic, and Elias felt the distance between San Francisco and Brooklyn like a physical ache. Then came the call from Marissa. Hope was sick, pneumonia, a complication from her premature birth. She was stable but in the hospital, and Marissa was a wreck. "I need you both," she said, her voice breaking. Elias didn't hesitate. He booked a flight to Oakland, texting Julian, "Hope needs us. I'm going. You coming?" Julian's reply was instant. "On my way." They met at the hospital, the sterile halls a stark contrast to the warmth of Marissa's party. Hope was in a crib, tubes snaking from her tiny body, but her eyes were bright, fighting. Marissa hugged them both, tears streaming. "You two are her miracle," she said. Elias and Julian took turns sitting by Hope's crib, reading her stories, their hands brushing as they passed the book. In those quiet hours, Elias saw Julian's strength anew. The same calm he'd shown on the plane, now tempered with a vulnerability that made Elias's heart swell. One night, as they sat in the hospital cafeteria, Julian broke the silence. "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Of this, of us, of messing it up." Elias reached for his hand, his own fears mirrored in Julian's eyes. "Me too," he said, "but I'd rather be scared together than alone." Julian's smile was small but real, and in that moment, Elias knew they were in this. For Hope, for Marissa, for each other. Hope pulled through, her recovery a slow but steady miracle. Elias and Julian stayed in Oakland for a week, helping Marissa with errands and cuddling Hope when she was strong enough. The crisis brought them closer, their bond forged in shared purpose. But as they prepared to return to their separate cities, Elias felt a question looming. Could they make this work across 3,000 miles? Back in San Francisco, Elias threw himself into saving the youth center. The city council's hesitation wasn't just bureaucratic. It was personal. Some members questioned whether a queer-focused space was necessary, their coded prejudice stoking Elias's fire. He revised his designs, incorporating Hope's story into the pitch. A nursery, a community kitchen, a space for families like Marissa's, for people like him and Julian. He sent the plans to Julian, who responded with a sketch of the center's entrance, vibrant with color and life. "This is it," Julian wrote. "This is home." Their relationship deepened, but distance was a constant hurdle. Video calls couldn't replicate the warmth of Julian's touch, the way his laugh lit up a room. Elias visited Brooklyn when he could, wandering Julian's tiny apartment, marveling at the sketches covering every wall. Julian came to San Francisco, sketching the bay from Elias's loft, his presence filling the space with possibility. But each goodbye at the airport felt like a small fracture, a reminder of the lives they'd built apart. One night, over a shaky FaceTime call, Julian's voice was heavy. "I got an offer," he said. "A gallery in London. 6 months, maybe more." Elias's stomach dropped. "That's huge," he said, forcing a smile. "You should go." But inside he was unraveling. Was this the end? Had they built something only to watch it slip away? Julian left for London, and the silence was deafening. Elias buried himself in work, but the youth center's funding was still in limbo, and his loneliness grew. He visited Marissa and Hope, now a chubby, giggling 8-month-old, and found solace in their bond. Marissa sensed his turmoil. "You love him, don't you?" she asked one afternoon, Hope napping in her arms. Elias nodded, his throat tight, But what if it's not enough? Marissa's eyes were kind but firm. You too brought my daughter into this world. You're stronger than distance. Her words stayed with Elias, a beacon in his doubt. He started texting Julian again. Small messages at first, photos of hope, updates on the center. Julian replied with sketches from London, street scenes and quiet moments, each one a reminder of their connection. Then came the breakthrough. The city council approved the youth center, swayed by Elias's revised plans and a viral campaign sparked by Marissa's story of Flight 214. Elias called Julian, his voice shaking with excitement. "We did it," he said. "The center's happening." Julian's laugh crackled through the phone. "I knew you would," he said. "I'm coming back for the groundbreaking." Julian returned in spring, his hair longer, his eyes brighter. The groundbreaking ceremony was a celebration of hope. Marissa and Hope were there, along with dozens of community members, queer youth, and allies. Elias spoke about the center's mission, his voice steady but thick with emotion. Julian stood in the crowd, sketching, his eyes never leaving Elias. After, they walked to a nearby park, the air warm with possibility. "I missed you," Julian said, his voice raw. "London was incredible, but it wasn't home. You are." Elias's heart pounded. "I thought I'd lost you," he admitted. Julian took his hand, his grip firm. "You didn't. I'm here. For good, if you'll have me." They kissed under a blooming cherry tree, the world fading around them, their future uncertain but theirs to build. The youth center opened a year later, its walls alive with Julian's murals, vibrant scenes of community, love, and resilience. Elias walked its halls daily, overseeing programs, watching kids find safety and belonging. Julian moved to San Francisco, his art career thriving alongside Elias's work. They found a small apartment together, their lives intertwining like the sketches and blueprints scattered across their dining table. Hope, now a toddler, was a constant in their lives. Marissa became family, her strength and humor a grounding force. She teased them about being Hope's dads. And though they laughed, the idea took root. Elias and Julian talked about their future, marriage, maybe, or fostering kids like Julian once was. The thought scared them, but it also felt right, like the final piece of a puzzle they'd been assembling since that night on the plane. One evening, at a community event in the center's courtyard, Elias and Julian stood together, watching Hope chase bubbles with other kids. Marissa joined them, her smile radiant. "You two changed my life," she said. "Hope's too." Elias squeezed Julian's hand, his voice thick. "You changed ours first." The center became a beacon, not just for queer youth but for anyone seeking connection. Elias and Julian mentored kids, shared their story, and built a legacy of love and sacrifice. The night of Flight 214 was never far from their minds, a reminder that a single choice, a single seat given up, could ripple into a life transformed. As the sun set over the courtyard, casting golden light on the murals, Elias looked at Julian, at Hope, at the community they'd built. He thought of that first-class seat, the champagne he'd left behind, and the life he'd gained instead. Love wasn't just a moment. It was a choice, a risk, a leap into the unknown. And with Julian by his side, Elias knew he'd leap again, every time.